Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Andrew Whitman in for Richard French, and we begin with an unspeakable tragedy. 5 police officers murdered in Dallas, 7 officers injured, and 2 civilians also hurt. Police have released the name and information about the suspect. They're also saying he specifically wanted to kill white police officers. Police on high alert across the country. Marcy Gonzalez now live in Dallas with more. Marcy?
And so many streets here in downtown Dallas are shut down as police gather evidence and information on this ambush that claimed the lives of 5 of their colleagues. Today, heartbreak in Dallas following the loss and chaos here overnight. 5 police officers killed, 7 others, along with 2 civilians injured, when a sniper positioned above a peaceful protest against police brutality starts shooting, targeting police officers.
He said he was upset about the recent police shootings. The suspect stated he wanted to kill white people, especially white officers.
With no cover from the spray of bullets from above, officers risk their lives saving others. One seen here taking on the gunman, that officer killed in this final act of bravery. Among the victims, 43-year-old transit officer Brent Thompson, who was married just 2 weeks ago, and Iraq War veteran Officer Patrick Zamarripa.
Our hearts are broken by this loss. We are one people, and we stand together.
Suspect Micah Johnson killed in the standoff. Police searching the former Army reservist home and questioning at least 3 other suspects.
This was a well-planned, well-thought-out, evil tragedy, and we won't rest until we bring everyone involved to justice.
Yeah, but we're now told that gunman acted alone. Federal officials say he had no known ties to terrorism. And despite his claims that he left bombs hidden here downtown, police say so far they have found nothing. Live in Dallas, Marcy Gonzalez, ABC News. Now back to you.
All right, Marcy, thank you very much. Sadly, Dallas is not the only example of police officers being targeted over the past 24 hours. Including an incident in southern Georgia overnight. A man called 911, then opened fire on the officer who responded. The officer was hit multiple times, but is expected to survive. The gunman is described as Asian, and police do not believe this case is connected to Dallas or any other recent incidents. There have been other incidents in Tennessee and Missouri involving police being targeted, but again, seemingly not connected to anything else we've had in the news this week. Let's get to our panel now. Michael Murphy joins us again. He's a former lieutenant commander detective of the New York Police Department. Dominic Carter is here, political journalist and author. We're also joined tonight by Mayo Bartlett. He's an attorney at the law offices of Mayo Bartlett PLLC. He's also the former chief of the Bias Crimes Unit at the Westchester County DA's office. And Richard St. Paul is with us. He's an attorney, a Republican strategist, and the former vice chair for the National Black Republican Association. And Mike, let me start with you. Obviously, everybody who ever wore a police uniform in mourning tonight, I'm curious what your reaction was as you saw what was unfolding in Dallas last night.
It was unbelievable. I was watching it last night on TV after I left here, and I was watching the peaceful protest and the march down in Dallas, and they reported shots being fired, and I just was following it live. I mean, this is social media and everything, and Facebook and Twitter, and just the updates coming in with how many officers were shot, and then word. I had a friend that lives in Dallas that was texting me at the same time, letting me know that he was getting information on the officers that were dying as well. So shock, disbelief, anger, of course, that someone chose that venue to be that evil to these officers who were there protecting people that were marching and protesting them. So a lot of anger, disbelief, shock.
And Mayo, there's an added level of discomfort that this brings to people when you're targeting police officers. Even as protesters were upset about police conduct in other places, there's something that strikes to the core of everybody when police officers are targeted.
I think that there's a fundamental problem in the way we view human life. And we value your life more based upon what you do for a living, whether you're a woman or a child. For instance, when people, or whether you're even an American, we always are told how many Americans died, women and children died. If you're an adult male, nobody seems to care. If these were sanitation workers, to me it would be the exact same thing. And we're having a conversation because it happened to be 11 police officers who got shot. If it was 11 people in a mall There would be a debate between the NRA and people who want to modify your right to have a gun, and we would be dismissed. And at some point, nobody would sit down and have the conversation, how is it that you can have an AR-15 in the United States in the first place? Why is it that the police are outgunned by civilians in the United States? So that's a conversation that needs to be had, but we have to value all lives, period. It shouldn't necessarily matter whether you're law enforcement or you're not law enforcement. There's a different conversation when you're law enforcement than it is when you're not.
And Dominic, it is a different conversation.
It's a big difference.
It strikes at home for a lot of people.
The police are our last line of defense. Last night I was very upset, as you know, at what had happened, and I went to bed early at 9 o'clock. That's how upset I was. We had just finished the show with no idea of what was in store for America within a couple of hours. Woke up early this morning, focused my eyes. It said breaking news. I thought it said 1 police officer killed in Dallas. Focused my eyes a bit more, and it said 5. Every life matters. Every life matters. But police, as someone who grew up in the projects, believe me, police are our last line of defense, and without them, we have nothing. So when a police officer is shot and killed, yes, it is extremely important.
And no less so than if you get shot and killed. You have to acknowledge that. Otherwise, your life is not equal. If you believe that if any of us here who are no longer serving in law enforcement don't have the same right to exist, then by definition, your life is not equal. So that's why I'm saying all these officers hopefully one day get a chance to retire and become civilians. Their life is equally valuable. Their children's lives are equally valuable. When we start to suggest that based upon your occupation, your life is worth more, then I think it's a slippery slope. I think you got to stop. You got to be fair to the police. You got to look at what they're dealing with, what they're put into. Again, look at what our gun laws are. We talked about it earlier. How is it that there's no uniform gun law in the United States?
But Mayo, I'm not sure that anybody's specifically saying that police officers' lives are more or less valuable than anybody else. It would be a tragedy no matter who the victims were. I think, Richard, it cuts emotionally to people because it's a police officer and targeted like this, not in the line of, I mean, they were on the job, but it wasn't a traffic stop. It wasn't at the, they were just standing there.
Yeah. So look, this is unfortunately this was not the first time this happened. If you recall, right here in New York, there were 2 police officers who were gunned down by an individual who said he was mad at a similar incident in which African American males were killed. And the answer is not violence on the police. We all know that, and our hearts go out to the police officers because they do protect us. But the answer has to be, why are we so divided? And this is what, and I'm going to use Donald Trump for this, but Trump is right. We are still so divided. And that's a conversation that has to take place. All life is precious and shouldn't be unnecessarily lost. But why is it happening in this instance? African American males die, then police officers die. That's the conversation that we need to have, because that does not need to happen.
And I think that's going to be the underlying question throughout the hour that we have in front of us. But Mike, I want to get back to a police perspective on this, because we've seen other departments. We know New York is gearing up and is doing more protective details today. I think officers in Washington, D.C. were sent out in pairs today. How does something like what we saw yesterday in Dallas impact other police officers and policing across the country?
Well, it's a national issue. It's just not regional. What happens in Louisiana, happens in Minnesota, affects everyone today. So police officers feel where years ago, you were a New York cop, you were a Jersey cop. Now we're one big family. So as the officers are beginning their shifts, they're going to be more aware. They're going to be backing each other up more. And getting to what you were saying, ma'am, I don't think it's that people think police officers' lives are more important than anyone else's. They're representative. We put them out there in the line to represent the state, to represent us as a society. And when they're attacked for that, we're all attacked. So I don't think anybody's saying that they're worth more, or their life is worth more than anyone. I'm just saying it's definitely a different type of attack. You're going after the state, you're going after society as a whole when you go after police officers.
And I agree with you there. It's a greater form of terror, but right before that happened, the conversation was, why is a man who has a license to have a gun getting executed in his car? And that person was by a police officer. And so toward that point, it's equally important that when law enforcement officers step outside of the line of what they're supposed to do, whether it's negligently, intentionally, or something else, that they be held accountable. And also, I think we have to look, and it's not fair to hold all police responsible for the actions of one or two officers, but it's certainly also not fair to hold the larger community accountable for the behavior of one individual who's, by all accounts, clearly a person who has some psychiatric problems.
The rhetoric out there on both sides is not helpful. It's just the rhetoric has got to a point where it's dangerous, and it is dangerous.
Well,
we'll see what's
that begs
happening.
the question: do we think something like what we've seen over the past week ramps up insecurity on both sides, or do you think people start to actually
Let me put it
take
to you
each
this
other's
way.
perspectives
Let me put it to
in
you this
mind?
way and ask you a question.
Yeah.
If you're a police officer tonight, do you want to go on patrol?
No.
I know I wouldn't want to. I know I would be scared to death. Is this my last life? I want you to think about this for a second. The police in Dallas, they've done a lot to improve police-community relations. Right. They have an African-American police commissioner. They are trying to bring about, so of all the places to pick to do something as psychiatric and crazy as this individual did, to do it in Dallas, and think about this for a second, those police officers marching with the protesters, protecting them, were actually taking pictures with them. Mm-hmm. And they ended up becoming sitting ducks. It's not right.
On the flip side, I would say also, and I've had this conversation with my friends, as an African-American male, I'm very cautious about my interaction with police also. I mean, it's heightened on both sides, both for police officers and as a black male, I'm concerned.
Well, for your children, you tell your son don't
Absolutely.
run in the street, go to the track because you don't want him to get shot because he has a hood on, or a sweatshirt on. So, I mean, we have to look at the culture. I think the entire culture in the United States right now is moving much more toward violence. The police are the front line of that. And also, we recently did an address at West Point. Look, unfortunately, you are an ambassador for everybody else in your profession when you are law enforcement or you're military, or if you are a black man or Latino, or you name it, in the community. And so what happens is you get labeled and you suffer the consequences. Almost without fail, it's officers who had nothing to do with the event who end up losing their lives or getting hurt based upon the conduct of one or two people who possibly were not properly screened and shouldn't have been police in the first place.
And the violence also seems like is a last resort when I think people say, look, nothing is happening. We get the same result where people are getting killed, whether it's police or a black male. And there's not a dialogue taking place. Nothing has changed. This is still taking place. What are we supposed to do?
But does this lead to greater understanding from each side of the other's perspective? We're very divided and entrenched as a society right now, and we're not really taking the other side's viewpoints or frame of mind into account.
I don't know anybody who's happy that these officers got shot. I know no one who's happy about that, or when any officers are shot, especially people who are not tied to any incident at all. And so I think that people's hearts go out to the families of people who've been wrongfully shot by police, as they do to the police officers. We have not had a real dialogue, truth and reconciliation. Right. And also, we talked also about what police are asked to do. Police are put in positions where they go out and they're in a quota system where you have someone who's not out on the street, a commissioner or a mayor, saying we need to generate revenue. So they make the police go into confrontational situations with the
goals.
Performance goals, absolutely, which is not fair to the officers. We cut mental health budgets and we send the officers out into the street to be the mental health professional, which they are not. And then we don't pay them proper salaries. And then we end up with these situations. But again, I look at this guy as I look at the man who went into the church in South Carolina. I don't view all white people as I do that guy. It's a guy who's a troubled person. And that person is not the person I would look to have the dialogue with, because he ideologically is so far gone that he's not going to be changed. But there are things we can do to bring the communities together.
Just real quick, Mayo makes a great point about performance goals. When I sat on city council, we had, I sat in the ComStat meeting, which is with the commissioner, and you talk about performance goals. You got to issue 100 cell phone tickets. That puts unnecessary pressure on a police officer and unnecessary interaction between the police officers and the civilians that you don't necessarily need, but because you're trying to reach your performance goals, you have those interactions.
Mike,
that's a great point.
It is a great point.
I mean, I don't know if the lieutenant wants to talk about.
Well, no, we spoke about that very point here last night. We said the policies and procedures that these officers have to follow put them in situations where there's more interactions with people in these neighborhoods.
Stop and frisk is a good example.
Stop and frisk. If there's a robbery pattern, ComStat will say we need to put more officers in the 28th precinct. So now you have 20 officers who usually don't work there, that don't know the community, there you're going to have interactions, and they're not all going to be good. A lot of them will be, some won't.
Mike, we had police-involved shootings, a pair of them that led to the rallies and the heat, people getting heated in Dallas, that then led to the shootings in Dallas last night. The response by police is obviously going to be to watch your back and be more cautious and probably a little more hard-nosed when it comes to the interactions that they're having going forward.
Right.
Are you afraid that this then begets a cycle that potentially repeats itself?
Well, I don't think that it'll be a cycle. I do think, though, that the officers, when they'll call for extra backup, they will back each other up, even if they don't call for backup. You know, if there's a gun run, Sector Charlie, and I'm talking NYPD terminology, will back up Sector Adam. They will. That's what we do. So they'll be careful. Listen, it's not a sure science, policing. We know that. It's a social science, but it's not a pure science. Still, things can go wrong. But I think that they'll be more careful. They may be less apt to take some type of police enforcement because they don't, they're afraid of what's going to happen at the end of it if it goes bad. So I think that's what happens after this, and then it calms down, and then.
I know you got to take a break. The bottom line is this: there are some people that should not be police officers. It's as simple as that. They're sent into these urban communities, housing project where I grew up, the Rods Neck houses, and frankly, they've never interacted with black people. Now, how are you going to deal with youngsters and you have no clue? And, the community must be respected. Police officers want to go home. The community must be respected. I'm gratefully sorry for what happened to police. I'm also sorry about what happened in Minnesota and what happened in Louisiana.
And it's all part of the same conversation, which will continue after a break. And up next, we'll look at the police shootings in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and St. Paul, Minnesota, and discuss how they did not happen in a vacuum and were not isolated incidents.